This afternoon, I am talking with Father James Lee, who has been the pastor of St. Michael Catholic Church in Olympia, Washington since July 1st, 1997. You will note that Father Jim, as Father Lee is known to his parishioners, is wearing a brace to help him hold up his head. This is because he has ALS and needs the support now after some period of time with the disease. Father, could we begin?
Please, be happy to.
Father Jim, it is customary when I do oral histories of this sort, although this is a unique one, I've done others, to ask something about the person as a human being, starting with sort of when they were young. Could you tell us a little bit about growing up in I gather, Chicago, South Chicago, I believe,
Yes.
mostly in the 1950s and 60s. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and maybe a little bit about your education, your background, your family, and so on at that time?
Sure, be happy to. Well, that was a long time ago. So I was born on January 1st, 1948, in the middle of a sleet and snowstorm. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and by the time I rolled around, Mom was, I guess, pretty used to having kids, so she didn't really get too excited when she was having labor pains. And my uncle Leroy, who brought my mom to the hospital, says they made it with only 20 minutes to spare before I was born. So, anyways, I figured that was a rather auspicious beginning.
Well, your parents missed the extra tax deduction for the previous year with your timing.
I know, and that was one of my dad's big regrets. And he would always tell me about that. But I told him, well, you got it on the other end.
That's true. Yeah.
So my dad was John Edward Lee, and my mom Ruth Evelyn Lau, and grew up on the south. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and so went to. I was baptized at St. Blaise Catholic Church at the end of January, and then we moved to the south side of Chicago when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and we attended Sacred Heart Parish at 69th and May. So in Chicago, we always describe where we live according to the parish that we belong to, Chicago being a highly Catholic city at the time. And where I lived, the city block, probably 75–80% of the people were Catholic. A lot of kids, so grew up in a very Catholic atmosphere. So my sister Pat, who is the oldest, was 14 years older than I am, and she moved out of the house when I was still quite young. And then my brother George and my brother Bob were 2 years younger than my sister Pat, and then 4 years younger than my brother Bob, and then a big gap when my sister Rita and I were born. So let's see. Always been Catholic, very much Catholic atmosphere growing up, and very much influenced my life. Probably one of the most significant events in my life, spiritually, back in those days, was my first Holy Communion. I was in 2nd grade, and I remember coming back from receiving my first Holy Communion and kneeling down and feeling this immense peace and this sense that I should be a priest. So that was the first inkling of a vocation. And at that time, vocations to the priesthood were encouraged, and just a lot of support for that. So we moved from the south side of Chicago out to one of the outlying suburbs on the south side, St. Linus Parish, and in 7th and 8th grade, I belonged to a vocation club. And where a couple of other students were thinking about priesthood or religious life, sisters, and so very much encouraged in my vocation to be a priest. Well, one of the big events was in early 8th grade. A Marino priest came and talked about vocations, and he showed this movie about missionary work in Chile, and I was enamored. I went up to him afterwards and just said, I want to become a Marino priest. He kind of looked at me and he said, and what's your name? And so I gave him my name and what's your home phone number? And well, a week later, he called my mom and dad and then came over to the house. And that's really how my vocation, especially to the foreign missions, began. We used to get the Marino magazine at home, and I would read about the missionaries, throughout the world. And I just had this strong desire to go someplace far away, like Africa or South America somewhere. So I went off to the minor seminary. So Marino had a seminary, a brand new seminary just outside of St. Louis in Chesterfield, Missouri. And they had just finished building it. And so when I arrived, we spent probably the first 6 months when we had free time helping plant grass and moving dirt piles and cleaning windows and getting the place presentable. It was a wonderful experience. It was the first time I'd ever been away from home. My dad was not terribly excited about me going off someplace, but my mom was very encouraging. So I spent 4 years in minor seminary with Marino from 1961, graduated in 65. Then went off to their college department in Glen Ellen, Illinois, about 30 miles west of the city, and spent 4 years there and got a bachelor's in sociology with a minor in philosophy. And then from there, we went to a year, we called it novitiate, but it was a year between college seminary and major seminary. And it was the time to be steeped more in the understanding of the constitutions of Marino, the work of Marino, and also to do some training in hospital ministry. After that year, went to Marino, New York, which is our headquarters, in Westchester County, about 35 miles north of the city, overlooking the Hudson River. It was in a town called Ossining, which is famous for Sing Sing maximum security prison. I was there for 2 years, and then after those first 2 years, we had an overseas training program, which was new at the time in seminary formation, and I put in for Tanzania. So myself and a classmate went over to Tanzania in 1972 in August and began my language learning, enculturation, and it was a real challenge. I'd never been overseas before, so this was the first time I was out of the States except for Canada, and it was quite the challenge because, one, I didn't speak the language, and two, pretty much everything was different. The people were different, the food was different, the atmosphere was different. I was in the southern hemisphere, and I was kind of unmoored in the beginning. Fortunately, I had other Marino priests and around me to just encourage me and tell me, you'll get through this, this is okay, this is pretty normal. Spent 5 months in intensive language learning about the culture, visiting different missions, and grew to just really love the place. So
you were not yet ordained when this was sort of an apprenticeship type thing, or
it was.
You had a fancier name than that?
Yeah, it was, and it was a real gift because it really helped solidify for all of us guys going overseas. Is this really what I wanted. It's just really what God was calling me to. So in many ways, it was like on-the-job training, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah, very much like an apprenticeship.
Sort of like the scholastics and the Jesuit order who taught me in high school, many of them at others. It was 3 years of built into their formal education to become Jesuit priests, doing some sort of work like that or in the missions that they had.
Yes, very, very similar.
That was also, it was interesting, your age compared to now when we see older guys coming through the seminaries. Back in sort of the pre-Vatican II era, for a while after that, going in 9th grade or thereabouts was pretty much the standard thing, as I understand it.
It was, yeah. So I went over to Tanzania in '72, so I was 24. And so I was there for 2 years and then came back for a year to finish up my master's in divinity and was ordained on May 17th, 1975.
Who was the bishop who officiated and actually ordained you, if I can ask?
If I can remember. I think it was Bishop O'Rourke. I do know he was the bishop from Peoria, Illinois, because he was, for the United States Council of Catholic Bishops, the liaison for foreign missions.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the ordinary from New York, whoever the archbishop or cardinal was at the time, would ordain Marianolos 1 year and then somebody else the next year, and then he would come back. So,
interesting. Sounds like you had a rather broad-based education, both spiritually and practically, as you became a Marinol missionary and later a parish priest.
So after ordination, went back to Tanzania and went to a mission called Ndoleleji, which was way off the beaten path. And you really had to want to go there to visit. Was with a wonderful group of Marinolers in Shinyanga Diocese and did truly missionary work. The area we were in was less than 2% baptized. It was an animist, not even religion. People believed in God, and they had an expression, Mungu yupo, God is, or God is here. But God was very distant. And the ancestors were the intermediaries. And the ancestors, if you were kind to them, appeased them, things would go well. When things went wrong, it was usually because the ancestors were upset or angry. And so they built a system of sacrifices around that to bring balance into life. So the ministry or the message of Christianity was actually very appealing, and I was able to make some real connections between their life situations and the good news of the gospel. So in many ways, I found myself really living in the Acts of the Apostles, going from village to village with some catechists who would help me just visit people, talk to people, and eventually bring people to ask questions about the meaning of life and what's really important. And so much of my work was catechetical, training catechists, and also what we would now consider the RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, and have sessions with people, and had some wonderful, glorious celebrations of the Easter Vigil, and baptized many folks. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. In the middle of my time in Tanzania, I was asked to come back to do some training in pastoral counseling and spirituality. So I did a master's program in Balmer at Loyola. and then went back for 3 more years in Tanzania to also work with our seminarians and lay missionaries who were beginning to come out at that time in the late 70s and early 80s. So
well, it sounds like it was a fascinating experience.
it was.
In a way, I suppose what you encountered with the people that lived there made it a little bit easier to discuss the faith than if they had already been something and didn't want to be converted
Right.
for whatever reasons.
Yeah, and because of their openness to God, that God's presence, it's much different than like my experience here in the Northwest, which is many people have some sort of notional idea of God, but God is maybe, maybe not. I'm fond of saying that it was much easier being a priest in Tanzania than it is now in the Northwest, because of that resistance to faith, to belief, to I'm not in charge, to I'm self-sufficient. Where in Tanzania, life was always on the margins. There were subsistence farmers. If the rains didn't come at the right time, they wouldn't have enough food. I experienced 2 minor famines while I was there, and having to help assist bringing food in from overseas and distributing food, and so life was very very much on the edge, and so people were open to, how do we make sense of this? How do we find meaning? So
That would make them quite receptive to the concepts that you were espousing and teaching them about. I would think.
Yeah.
It's interesting here. You have we're very affluent as people, and yet we all feel that we should be totally independent and make our own decisions. We'll be seeing it this year where we have the coronavirus epidemic or pandemic, and people all the way along the way arguing that you can't tell me what to do. If I do it, I will do it on my own. And, be it wearing masks or getting a vaccine or whatever. But it sounds like the people there were much more open to other thoughts.
Yeah, and they're much more family-oriented and extended family. So even the way they greet one another, signifies that. So very much having to depend on one another, and so they would help each other when food sources were low, and they would share food, and so it was very much the extended, wider family. So,
all what you were suggesting, that we need to look out for each other, if that's God's plan. Couldn't have been that foreign to what they were already doing.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Well, in about 1986, you decided to go into diocesan work or parish work, however you would characterize it. And I believe you had been active in Maryknoll up until that point, but tell me if there was something in between. But you came here to the Archdiocese of Seattle that year.
Yeah. So in '82, I was asked to do seminary formation work for Maryknoll. So I came back from Tanzania, and for 4 years we had a initial seminary year in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I was involved with that ministry for 4 years, and the number of guys coming into Maryknoll was down to 3 or 4, and there were 2 priests, and I said, I really want to go back to Tanzania. I really want to go back to missionary work. I felt like I wasn't really needed, and so, but before I did that, I'd been ordained for, at that time, about 13, 14 years, and I said, I'd like to take a sabbatical. And I had a priest friend at St. Francis of Assisi Parish in Burien who knew me and was also a Maryknoll priest, and he invited me to come out and help out in the parish, and I would have some time to do some studies at Seattle U, and he also knew I liked retreat work, and so that I would have an opportunity to do that. So I said, well, it sounds like a great opportunity. I've never really worked in a parish in the United States before, so I figured this would be just really a good fit. So I came out in late '86 and fell in love with the parish and fell in love with ministry in the United States. And I had planned to go back to Tanzania in January 1st of 1988. Well, that did not happen. God had other plans. Very much like that early experience of God saying, I would like you to be a priest. I felt in my prayer and with my spiritual director that God was asking me to be a missionary in a different way, to be a missionary to the Northwest, which was very unchurched and still is, at the time. So I discerned that. I asked for an extension to my sabbatical, which Marinol agreed to. And then in 1990, knowing that this really was what God was asking, I began the process of what we call incarnation. So the formal process of leaving Marinol, because I made a perpetual oath of obedience to the society, and then the process of coming into the archdiocese. So that was a 3-year process. And so I was sent to Assumption Parish in Bellingham, beautiful old church built in the 1920s in neo-Gothic style with beautiful stained glass windows. And so I was there for 7 years, and it was during that time that I was officially incarnated or became a priest of the Archdiocese of Seattle. And it was during that time that that my biking adventures began. So I was a jogger up until then, and I was beginning to have some back pain and sciatica pain, and so the chiropractor that I was going to suggested that I stop doing that and find something less abusive to my body. And so that's when I got into bike riding. And my friend, Father Joe Tyson and Father Gary Zender, also at that time, we decided to buy bikes together. And that kind of began our bicycling career. So
Bishop Tyson at the time was here in Seattle Archdiocese.
Correct.
Was he yet a bishop, or was he still?
He was a diocesan. He was a pastor out at Monroe.
Yeah.
And then Father Gary was at Enumclaw at the time. And we did a lot of mountain biking. And then Father Joe got assigned to the South Seattle cluster, St. Edward's, St. George, St. Paul. And then Father Gary was assigned to St. Anthony's in Renton. And we took a number of vacations.
So you weren't that terribly far apart from each other physically down the
No.
southern part of the Seattle area.
Right, yeah. So we were able to bike quite often. We would take our days off and got into biking. And Father Gary introduced me to downhill skiing. So that was always that was a fun adventure. So, and then I moved here, like you mentioned, Pat, in July 1st of 1997.
So you've been here, well, you're coming up on 25 years.
I know.
What you assumed at the time, presumably, was going to be a term or two.
Exactly. Yeah, I thought maybe 12 years, like most everybody else. And and circumstances just happen. I mean, Archbishop Brunette that year turned 75, so he had to put in his resignation. And at that same year, we had just finished building the new office building, expanding the school, putting in a new parking lot. And The generosity of the folks, raised 2/3 of the money, and then we borrowed 1/3 of the money from the archdiocese. And so I went to the Archbishop Brunette, and I said, I know things are kind of in flux, and I'd be happy to, take an assignment someplace else. We have a, $3.5 million debt. I'd be happy to stay to try and pay that down for a couple of years before somebody new comes. But I'm open to whatever you want. And he said, well, I'm kind of in flux too, so let's just do it a year at a time. I said, sounds good to me, so whatever happens would be great. So that was our conversation in March. In late April, I got a phone call from the Vicar for Clergy saying, Archbishop Brunette wants to know if you want a 1-year or a 6-year term as pastor. and I said,
so much for a year at a time.
Yeah. So I said to myself, well, can I pray about it? And Father Magnano said, no, Archbishop is sitting here and he wants an answer now. So I
didn't want God talking something different.
So I said, well, yeah, give me 6 years, and if things change, I can always, So that's how I got another 6-year term, which was at that time not terribly uncommon, but uncommon enough. So 6 years comes to an end. It's 2015, and I've been here 18 years, and really felt, this is, I've done what I could. I've, really worked hard, and the parish was
little did you know what was still to come.
I know. So I sent in my letter asking, for a new assignment, and Archbishop Sarton was Archbishop at the time, and my pre-support group were very supportive about, 18 years is, plenty time to get in a parish. Except one of the guys then said, and what if the Archbishop asked you to stay? Would you be willing? And it was like, where did that come from? And so I kind of sat there in silence, and then I said, if the Archbishop asked me, I would be obedient and say yes. Well, that's exactly what happened. Because there were no ordinations that year, and there was no one that he felt could take over. So he asked me to stay. So I got another 6-year assignment.
Well, for those not familiar with our parish here in Olympia, this is my understanding the largest in the archdiocese, or very close to that.
Yeah.
With an extremely wide variety of programs and things always going on. So they probably really needed someone with, some experience,
right,
and some savvy on how to make those all keep working. And you had proved that you could.
Yeah. So we're about the 3rd largest. St. Louis and Bellevue is probably numerically the largest. The cathedral parishes is quite large. Many people go there specifically because it is the cathedral. Yeah. And and we've had many different ministries and a lot of outreach in the parish. And so it is a complicated operation.
Well, you have been involved as pastor in the development of an awful lot in this parish, or a continuing operation of an awful lot. I'm thinking everything ranging from additional changes to the physical plant and fundraising to setting up and establishing a 24-hour adoration chapel where people actually get signed up and they come by appointment to make sure all the gaps are filled. And a huge variety. They have a major school in the parish. You're involved periodically, or at least the parish is, in some of the work that's done with the legislature to influence lawmaking and public policy. It must be fascinating. Do you want to describe any of that in a little more detail than I just rattled off?
Well, at times people will ask me, what's the most important thing, or your most important accomplishment? And for me, it's been able to have 24/7 adoration, which started back in Lent of 2003, where people can come to the Adoration Chapel any time of the day or night. It can be at a regular hour. They could just drop in. It could be at a time of crisis. It could be at a time where somebody asked them to pray, and so they'll come, and it's just so incredible to see one person, 10 people, just in there praying all at the same time, day and night, and so that's been a wonderful ministry, and has borne a lot of fruit. We have a men's shelter during the winter time, been able to keep that going even with COVID restrictions, been able to expand even. It's taken a lot of work. We have wonderful youth ministries. We have Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which is a Montessori-based religious education program. We have small groups. We have over 40 small groups during Advent and Lent. Many of those continue throughout the year. That continues to grow. More people are involved in that. We've been doing some different outreach for people looking into the faith, such as Alpha, a new program that's slowly growing called the Evangelical Catholic, helping people really see the mission of the church as go make disciples, and then giving them tools to do that. And so that ministry continues to grow. So our liturgies are filled with a sense of community, a sense of prayer, a sense of joy, characterized by wonderful music and hospitality. Really try to involve as many people as possible so that folks feel this is really their parish, that this is their home, that they belong here, and that through them to invite others to consider the faith. So really having that missionary sense, if you will.
Sort of leading by example, I guess, is what you have those of us in the parish trying to do with the broader community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember one time, I, of course, been part of one of the ministries, extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, and I remember early on I was standing there at my station, and you had finished up someplace at another station, and you came over, and I figured, well, you're the ordinary minister, if there was one, and I should withdraw, but no, that was not your agenda. You wanted to be sure I had a supply of the hosts, and I was getting low, so I was most pleased when you contributed all I needed to keep going. Yeah. I don't like to have to break them, but I do have to in a pinch too.
Yeah, and being as attentive to that, as Eucharistic, as a priest and as extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, to just be attentive to, what the needs of the next person might be. Yeah.
Well, you have volunteers, and you take it seriously and support us. And, it's all we can ask. And I'm sure not everyone would in your line of work, shall we say. Yeah. I've been a member now over my life. I was thinking of this the other day in preparation for today, our session. And I've been a member of 7 parishes and many different types. A brand new one that was just created, one that had existed 6 months when we moved to the area and became members, and others that were more established. Some were very wealthy. I was in probably the wealthiest parish in Houston for a few years. It served the area where all the millionaires lived down there, among others. I didn't live in that part of town. But I was nearby.
But you were still welcome. That's one of the beauties of the Catholic Church.
And this particular parish, I just see so much more. I saw parts of it in other parishes, but never so much and so, so vibrant. Yeah. And I think that has to do with something to do with your leadership, Father Jim.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Early on in my seminary formation, one of the Maryknoll priests said to me, "Lead by example, and don't ask anybody to do something you are not willing to do yourself." So be one of the first to get there, and be one of the last to leave, and make sure you dump the garbage.
Well,
yeah, and that's always stuck with me.
That's a good definition of leadership in any operation of any profession.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, I understand that in addition to all that we do here and have been doing, you are not through with an idea. Can I ask you about a goal that you have sort of announced at one point or another for this parish still?
Yeah. So, thanks for asking, Pat. So, little preface. I was at an Alpha Global conference in London about three or 4 years ago. And one of the speakers said, and I had just been diagnosed with ALS. And so it was still pretty fresh, and I was still processing, what that might mean. And the speaker said, "You're not dead, so you're not done." And it just struck my heart. And it was like the Lord saying to me, "Jim, you're not dead, and you're not done, and I've got plans for you." And it was so encouraging for me, because I was, I didn't know what to expect. 50% of the people who develop ALS within the first 3 years die. Yeah. And so I'm 3.5 years in, and I'm still doing relatively well. And so that was a real spur to me to to focus on some unfinished business. And one piece of that was, I had always dreamt of being able to make our Catholic school available without the burden of tuition, especially for families who just couldn't make it. So over the years, we've grown our endowment, we've increased tuition assistance, and yet there are still some folks, even with that. And so the goal, when we put together our strategic plan for the parish for 2026, is to have, like every other ministry in the parish, to have the ministry of the school, be funded through the Sunday offering or through stewardship. And so about 1.5 years ago, I put together the tuition task force, and we're moving ahead on making that a reality. So over the last 2 years, the first year we cut tuition increase in half. This year, in the midst of COVID, we're having no tuition increase. And we have plans to then educate the entire parish around stewardship tuition, around this goal, and to help folks understand it, and to increase stewardship so that we can provide access to Catholic education, both here in the parish, and our hope and our goal, once that is established, to then be able to send folks in the parish send their children to Pope John Paul II High School and to be able to pay for their tuition. And then, even beyond that, they have money available to send tuition assistance for parishioners who go off to Catholic colleges. So the whole sense of really enabling our parishioners to truly see that we are a community of faith committed to the mission of Jesus Christ, to form disciples through Catholic education, and to assist them to truly be leaders in the Catholic Church and in the community, to influence a culture that so often is defined by me getting ahead, having what I want, having more money, better position, and rather than being focused on oneself, to really be outward focused. How can we transform society? How can we help meet the needs of the marginated? How can we really steer our public policy toward a value-based? So anyway, big goals, hoping to see some of those at least begin to grow, and then pray for them from heaven. So,
I think it's a goal that is very useful to have, and yet practically probably can be achieved.
it can be achieved.
I mean, when you have asked the parish to rise to the occasion on other expensive projects, that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And why not this one? This is probably in some ways the most important of all.
And there are other parishes out there who've done this, especially in Wichita, Kansas. Actually, the entire diocese is through stewardship funds all their Catholic education, all the high schools or grade schools in the parishes and high schools. So it is doable, and just trying to lead by example.
Well, Father Jim, we're probably nearing the end of our conversation, as I like to call these sessions on camera today. But before we do, it's customary for me to ask if there's anything that we have overlooked or not addressed or not talked about in the depth you want that you would like to mention at this time.
Maybe two things.
Okay.
One, deep appreciation for my formation in Maryknoll and the years I've spent with them, the education, the quality of education I received, and the men and the religious sisters, the Maryknoll sisters that I was privileged to work with, both in the missions and also here in the United States. That incredible people who really helped shape me to be the person I am. And with that, the people in the parishes where I've been privileged to serve, St. Francis of Assisi, Assumption, and here at St. Michael, we've had a number of young priests come through St. Michael since I've been here as pastor. This is a wonderful place to start one's ministry, or seminarians being with us. And one of the things I often share with them is the importance of allowing the community to shape you, to shape your priesthood. And that's been true for me at each of the parishes, that the community has shaped my priesthood, has helped me to be a better priest, a better person, have really loved me into leadership. Some of my closest friends are parishioners, certainly here at St. Michael. Some I keep in contact with at Assumption. In July, I'm going to participate in a funeral for a woman who was very influential when I first came. And what a privilege to be able to be there for her. I was able to go for her husband's funeral about 5 or 6 years ago. And so just so very grateful for the role that you folks play in my life and my priesthood. So words of deep gratitude.
Well, thank you, Father Jim, or Father James Lee, to be more formal at this point. I appreciate your time and energy and doing this session, conversation, as I call it, today, and certainly add my own wishes of continued success in your ministry for as long as we are able to have you.
Great. Thanks, Pat, and it's great being in ministry with you.
Thank you.